Hello and welcome to our podcast from English at Leeds Trinity. I'm Richard Storer, I'm a lecturer in English at Leeds Trinity, and I'm very happy that I'm joined today by two students on English programmes at Leeds Trinity. We've got Yvonne.
Hello.
And we've got Eloise.
Hello.
So, welcome. Thank you for being here. And I'll just explain a little bit about what our podcast is going to be like. We want it to be just as many different voices, as many different contributors from staff and students at Leeds Trinity doing English in any way. We just want to talk about things that we're doing, things that we find interesting, things that we've read, things that we like, things that we've learned, things that we've researched. And that is basically it. And that's what we're going to do today. This is the first in a series of podcasts, and we are going to be working our way through the alphabet. So each episode is going to be focused around a letter of the alphabet, and as this is our very first one, we're giving it the title, Give Me an A. And so hopefully everything that we're going to do today is going to be related to A in some way. And the first thing I've done is I have gone to the Oxford English Dictionary, which I always encourage everybody to do as much as they can because it's such a great source of information. It's so interesting. And I've picked 7 words beginning with A that I thought were interesting. And I'm just going to read those out, and then we're each going to choose one that we're going to say something about and have a bit of a conversation about. So the 7 words I've got are allness, amber, plum, ass, agoraphobia, anger, apricot. Now in a minute I'm going to ask Yvonne and Eloise to choose one from that list and say if there's a reason why they find it interesting or anything about it. The one I'm going to talk about is amber. It's a word that has a kind of personal meaning for me because when I was at primary school, a very long time ago, we did maths with a big set of wooden blocks. And each block represented the numbers 1 to 12. And each block had a colour. And you learned the colour for each number. And then you did sort of your maths by putting the blocks together or on top of each other. It was a system called colour factor. I've never heard of it.
I've never heard
Since
of that.
I don't think it was around. No. But I don't know whether that helped me to be good at maths or not, as I'm not. I wouldn't say I am. But one thing that really sticks in my memory from that is that amber was the word for 10, and I can just see that block, wooden block that was coloured a kind of orangey colour, but we learned that it was amber, and so to me, unusually, amber is always associated with 10.
With the number 10.
With the number 10. I can't say it's actually a word that I use as I'm going around every day now, and I don't look at things and think, oh, that's amber. Amber is like, for me, reserved for that particular memory.
Like a synesthesia sort of
association.
Yes, synesthesia with a kind of maths angle to it. So it's that's interesting. Right. So now, Eloise, from the list, what takes your interest?
I've never heard of the word allness, like ALLNESS. It looks cool as well, like the 2 L's, 2 S's.
That's true. Yes.
And I'd never heard it before, and it feels very like Walt Whitman, which is what I'm going to talk about later as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know how to describe it. Just all, very worldly in nature. That's the sort of words that come to mind when I read it.
I've got to say, when I was looking for words in the OED last night, I saw allness, and I'd never seen it before. No. But just like you, it kind of.
What does it actually mean?
Well, I've got the definition here. It's not a word that has got a lot of history, but neither is it completely. It hasn't got a lot of use, but neither is it considered obsolete because they've got an example from someone using it in 2004. The allness of the material universe.
That nature.
That vibe,
It has
that's
that
it.
Same vibe.
What a good word.
Yeah.
And I've also got a quote also from the OED. This is one of the great things about the Oxford English Dictionary. It just takes you to all these examples from 1897, the allness and everywhereness of God.
So very Walt Whitman.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
surprised he's not used that word, and I've not seen it.
He didn't make it into the list, but doesn't mean to say that he didn't.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So allness, again, it's a bit of a challenge to work it into your conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you picked that one. And what about you, Yvonne?
Well, I was thinking about picking aplomb, simply because there's a Spanish word for it, aplomo, but it finishes with an O, so I'm just interested on it ending in a B.
And what does it mean in Spanish?
It's hard to describe. Do you have a definition for it? Because I was trying to figure out a definition for it, but I can't.
I'll tell you what the definition. Well,
define it.
I think the origin of the word is to do with being perpendicular. When you've got a plomb, is something to do with lead. Weight. And so if you kind of hang a piece of lead on a string and it hangs down, it's straight, isn't it? And that's perpendicular. But then the more, I think, modern use of it is to mean assurance, confidence, self-possession, coolness. Coolness.
Yeah.
Aplomb.
Because, so plomo in Spanish is also lead. So it's interesting that sort of still carries out, and it hasn't changed in any way.
Does aplomo in Spanish have that meaning of coolness?
Yeah, it's sort of like an attribute of someone that's confident but calm and has sort of that. Yeah.
That sounds exactly the same sort of meaning, I think. Yeah. Right. Okay. Great. Thank you. Now, just before we leave those words, I just wondered then if we can have a guess at which one of those 7 words, allness, amber, aplomb, ass, agoraphobia, anger, apricot, which is the one that has been in the English language. That is to say, there are examples of it in English writings, the longest, and which is the one that is newest. Any guesses?
I'm gonna guess and say ass, because I feel like I've seen it, because it was like a donker, so I feel like I've seen it in like Shakespeare.
Right.
So it feels old, but then aplomb is so funny looking that it could be very old.
It is a funny looking
It
one.
is a
Yes,
funny-
you're
yeah,
right.
it is a
You're
funny
right.
looking
You're right. We're looking at it from here. And
Usually the funniest sounding words are the oldest. So, but I'll stick with ass for now.
Ass for your for the oldest.
But for me, I think it's gonna be anger.
Okay.
I think I've looked at it in History of English at some point.
Yeah.
So I think it's the oldest. I could be wrong because I don't know a lot of these words.
And what about the newest?
What I was thinking about was that apricot would be the newest because it's a fruit that's not native to the UK or anywhere near it. So I thought it might be the newest. We also considered agoraphobia. I consider agoraphobia. I think you said...
I think agoraphobia definitely, because psychology is kind of a new study. Everything's sort of come about in the past 100 years or so. Usually if you would be agoraphobic in the 17th, 18th century and you was a woman, they'd prescribe you with lying down in the sea. They wouldn't say you were agoraphobic or acknowledge it as a mental illness. So I'd say that's the newest.
So the thing may have been around for a while, but the name is probably fairly new.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I was, but my rationale was thinking that agoraphobia as independent, so agora and phobia, they are very old words, so I didn't consider it the newest for that reason. But I mean, in terms of the psychological term, it's probably the newest.
Well, you're right that agoraphobia is made of 2 words that are very old. It goes back to ancient Greek words. So the agora part is the open space, and the phobia, as we all know, is about fear. But that is the newest one in terms of when it came into the dictionary. It came into German first, probably somebody writing a psychological paper.
Probably about Freud or something.
That sounds about right.
I haven't got his name down, but something like that. So that's the most recent in terms of when it started to be used in English. The one that is oldest is ass, indeed.
I got it right.
Anger is also quite old, but ass is thought to, well, it's found in Old English texts.
Interesting.
And it's got an interesting history because it's thought that it does come from a Latin word from which we get other words like asinine, but it's thought to have somehow gone into Celtic languages before it went into Old English. So it's kind of been on interesting kind of route.
Has its meaning changed in any way?
I don't think so. In as much as its meaning has always been the animal.
Yeah.
Obviously now we use the word ass in another sense, but that's not the same word. That's actually a totally different word.
Yeah.
But what I don't know, and this is one to look up later, is when the word donkey came in.
Yeah, because if that's the original word, then when did people decide to start calling it a donkey?
Instead? And is there a difference between the two? That's something I ought to know.
Yeah, true. Maybe it's as the donkeys.
No, because I was trying to think, how do you say donkey in Spanish, but it's asno. So it's related to the word ass.
Okay, so we've got the donkey from somewhere else, not from the Romance languages.
Yeah,
right.
We'll find out later.
Okay. Yes, so that's it. So ass is the oldest. And anger is an interesting one because that is a one that has come into English from Scandinavian languages.
Yeah.
So it's one of those Norse words.
I thought it was. Yeah.
That's it. We could just do a little thing about apricots. Do we like them?
I don't think I've eaten them enough to have an opinion on them.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I was like trying to imagine the taste of apricot and my mind went completely blank.
Right.
Like,
Okay. And I don't like them.
Do you know?
I think I only need to eat them once to
they look pretty. They look nice.
I like the name. I like the name.
Yeah.
And this is something that actually another student who's not here today has brought up with me before. Why do we say apricot, not apricot?
Good point.
Because when we look at the words it came from, they all look like they would have been pronounced ab or ap. And somewhere on the line, we've kind of made that into an A sound. So
Do Americans say apricot? I feel like somebody says apricot.
that will be something that we can find out from the Oxford English
Yeah.
Dictionary, because if
True.
you look at it online, you can always click on the audio, which tells you how it's
American and
pronounced.
English,
Yes. Okay, thanks very much. Well, news just in, we have actually had a quick look at the Oxford English Dictionary, and for the first time in my experience, I couldn't get the answer from there because it only gives us one pronunciation of apricot, and that's apricot. But we all think, or we have heard people say apricot, maybe on some American TV program. So that is one that we'll keep on following up. But that leads us on to what I wanted to do next today, which is A for accent. And accent is something that I think we're always interested in talking about in English at Leeds Trinity. And one of the great joys of meeting new students all the time and new members of staff is hearing different accents. So we really value that. And therefore, I thought it would be quite interesting if we just reflect for a minute, each of us, on our own accents. So we have really kind of we come from three different places. And that probably means we have different ways of speaking English. I'll just describe my accent in as much as I can, first of all. I'm from a town in Surrey, and so that's way down below London, so it's really the south. And although I've lived in the north for more than half my life, I haven't really picked up any kind of northern accent. So that just shows how strongly where you grow up really determines how you speak. And I think anybody, as soon as they hear me, can work out that I'm not from Yorkshire. And where I lived and grew up in Surrey, it's really an area that is very much influenced by London. So most of the people who live in my town, they or their family, like my own parents, have come there from South London or East London. And so it's really part of a big kind of London zone. You won't really pick up a distinctive Surrey accent if you walk around the streets. And so the features that I would say of my pronunciation, and most things about pronunciation are to do with vowels, really, aren't they, most of the time, is that I pronounce words spelled with an A often as R. So I say castle, bath.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's the classic way of distinguishing north and south that people often
castle.
think. But I think an even more kind of telling way is whether you say rugby, cup, Monday, or whether you say rugby, cup, Monday. And I, again, coming from the south, I say that sound, rugby. So that's another kind of tell, if you like. And the third one is that I tend to pronounce a lot of diphthongs. And so for the sound like in snow, I pronounce that O sound really as O, which is really two sounds to run together, U, O. And if I say gate, I really say that with two sounds again, I, A, like that. So those vowels are diphthongs for me.
Yeah.
And that, again, is different from a lot of the way that people speak around Leeds and West Yorkshire, where they're much more likely, and I would love it when I hear it, but I can't really do it myself, kind of snore and
Snore.
gate, like that, where it's not
Nice.
a diphthong.
Snore.
It's actually just one long vowel.
Yeah.
And when I go back to my town in Surrey, I notice that actually people really are hitting the second sound of that diphthong
Do
now.
you get told that your accent has changed since you've lived there?
No, I've never been told that, so
Have
I
you
don't think
not?
it has changed enough. But I do
Ah.
notice as I walk around, you hear people kind of going gate or snow, like that. They really hit that second part
Yeah.
of the
Yeah, yeah.
diphthong. So they're going more and more into diphthongs. I think eventually some words will turn into two-syllable words.
I
Yeah.
don't think I would have ever have noticed that unless you said it.
Right.
But if I ever meet someone
Yeah.
from Surrey now, I
Yeah.
guess I'll listen.
That
Listen
is-
up. And not just anywhere in the southeast.
That is
I would
so
say.
interesting because obviously when I moved, I'm from Spain, but I moved to the UK 9 years ago now, and I lived in Oxford for most of that time. And then I moved here, and actually some of my sounds have changed
Right.
to adapt to a Yorkshire accent.
Right.
Like for example, I used to say bath, and now I say bath.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And
And
also
what about
with
castle?
castle.
You've come to the better side.
Yeah.
Castle.
Yeah, so now I've changed some of the things that I used to say in a more southern
Right.
accent, which also feels more natural to me because living down south, it actually felt like I had to put on an accent because
Okay.
I
Right.
felt like I wasn't being understood that well. So I
Right.
just got used to.
So the northern accent is like a bit more relaxed,
It's-
less.
It's a
sort
bit
of
easier for my
pressure. Yeah.
foreign accent, I guess, because in Spain we do have diphthongs and we do have like different sounds, but we have 5 vowels really, so it makes speaking for me a lot simpler. So it took me a really long time to make the difference between and
Yes, I see.
oh.
Oh, that's
Yes.
really
Like yeah, that's
Yes.
really hard for
Yes.
me to do.
Yeah.
Right. So you had 5 vowels. You've had to add some more
Yeah.
in order to work with English.
Yeah, so for example, when I was learning English in Spain, like we used to get told to say things like sheet and like really enunciate it because we could say the wrong word really easily.
I see. Right, I see where you're going. Yeah.
Really easily. It's really hard for us because we only have 5 vowels, so it doesn't really matter how you pronounce them. They
Yes.
sound the same.
Yes. Right. So
it
you don't
is
really
the
have
same
that long
meaning.
e.
No, we don't.
In that, right? Okay.
The only way we have a long vowel is if we have a H in the middle. So, for example, alcohol is for us alcohol.
Right.
Oh,
So-
that sounds way better. That sounds so good.
What about you, Louise?
The conversation with my accent probably comes up once a week at this point. 'Cause ever since I moved out of Salford, when I moved to Yorkshire, it was always people imitating my accent or
Right.
being like, what? So I've noticed a lot that I say different from moving away. So my Y sounds at the end of a word, so the word sorry. Or when you said rugby, before.
Right, yeah.
So
Yeah.
rugby, sorry, cloud air, sun air.
Yeah. So it's definitely a kind of eh sound that you're saying
Yeah.
instead of an e sound.
So it'd be
sound.
sunny, which
Yeah.
feels like I have to put on, a lot of stress to get that sort of sound out.
Yes.
Sunny.
Right.
Instead of
sunny.
being, but sunny just feels so like sunny.
Yes.
Just feels so
Yeah.
relaxed in
Like,
the way
it's
you
so
Right.
normal.
Right.
Yeah, it's so normal.
and you also say the what I say I sunny, you say
like sun.
yeah.
Instead
Yeah.
of
So you
sun.
say sunne,
Yeah,
but
sunny.
it's an as well.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I think my accent's quite blunt. But I also think my accent has changed a lot as well from moving away from Salford. I think I've got posher. When I say that to my friends, they go, posh. And I'm like, oh. But I think it has. I think I pronounce things a lot better than I used to. When I was growing up, it was
Right.
quite rough and quite a bit like this.
Right.
So I don't talk like that anymore.
So it's sort of hearing other accents as kind of
I think so. Living around other people,
Yeah.
I live with a girl from the Midlands, a lad from the south, and then I lived in Ireland for a year and a half. So I always had to. If I said sunny, they'd go, "What? What do you mean?" And I'd be like, "Oh, sunny."
right.
Sunny.
It's so interesting as well because that conversation always goes like hand in hand with the conversation about what we consider a posh accent,
Yes,
which
it
is really interesting because who decides what's a posh accent?
Yeah.
And it's not just different, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
But it's just an interesting conversation that always sits
Yes.
hand in hand with.
And I'm interested in that you say Salford specifically, which to me is just part of Manchester. Probably that's not what you should say to anybody from there.
But Salford is a
Right.
is a part of Manchester,
Right.
definitely.
Right.
I mean, we're our own city, but we don't have a city centre.
Yeah.
We do, but we don't talk about it. But like Manchester is our city
Yes.
centre, so
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Salford actually came from. It used to be called Saltford
Right.
because of all the canals that
Right.
came through. They
Yeah.
used to
Yeah.
import salt through the
Yeah.
canals, but then I think because Salford people can't say their T's, it changed to Salford.
I see. Yeah.
it does make it
Yeah.
easier to pronounce,
Yeah.
though. Salford.
Yeah,
Salford
Saltford is
would
very.
be really difficult. Yeah.
You have to stop at the.
Yeah.
It's like when water.
Yeah.
For me, I just say water.
Or, yeah.
Well,
Well, that's another thing. So there's another. Actually, that's about accent in terms of consonants, isn't it?
Yeah.
And whether you pronounce a T or whether you pronounce a glottal stop like or.
Yeah.
or I just was interested in it because. I mean, there's lots of students at Leeds Trinity who come from Manchester and from that side
yeah.
of the of the Pennines, as it were. But then, as you say, it's not like they all do what you do.
No. I live with a lad who's from Stockport, and Stockport's really not that far from Salford. It's still part of Manchester. It's just a different borough, but he speaks different to me.
Yeah.
Like I will say. Oh, I'm off to uni, and he's like, uni, like he always takes the mick out of me. And we're from basically the same area, we're from the same city, but it's still very, very different the way we talk.
Yeah.
And then we were talking the other day about people from, I'd say Bury, but
Yes.
it's Bury,
Yes.
whereas they'd say Bury.
Yeah.
They're from Bury,
Yeah.
and I'd say that they're from
Yeah.
Bury, but we're 10 minutes
Yeah.
away from each other.
Nice.
Right. Well, this subject, I think we will definitely come back to at different stages.
Yeah.
And we're not interested in making fun of anyone's accent. We just really love hearing it. And it is great fun to
Yeah.
compare accents, isn't it? And so that one we will definitely come back to. And thank you for sharing those things.
No problem.
No problem.
So we're going to think now about literature, and literature, something to do beginning with A, and we've chosen Jane Austen as a novelist who I'm particularly enjoying reading this year. For the first time this year, we ran a new module called Austen, the Brontes, and Woolf. And so that started with the Jane Austen bit, and I got to do the Jane Austen part of that. And so I went back and read the Jane Austen novels that I read a long time ago. and did some further research, and really enjoyed that. And one of the things that I found really interesting about Austen is how she's a novelist of the early 19th century, but she's also, in a way, a kind of a presence in 21st century culture, not just for her novels, but in so many other ways. There's, I think it's one of the notes, £10 note, is it? I think has got Jane Austen on it. Lots of films, adaptations and things are still around, and lots of other ways in which people sort of engage with Jane Austen. So she's a sort of 21st century phenomenon, as well as being a 19th century novelist. And I think that that's a great opportunity to study other aspects of her besides just the novels, which is what I was trying to do in that part of the module. And so I'm interested to know, Eloise and Yvonne, neither of you did that module with me.
Nope.
Doing other things. So, but now, have you got any recollection, any experience of studying Jane Austen?
I first read Pride and Prejudice when I was 15. So
right.
That was 8 years ago now. But it was probably the first book that I genuinely fell in love with, where I was like, oh my God, I like reading. I really
Nice.
enjoyed it. I found Elizabeth Bennet's character really interesting. I really liked her. I mean, I had my issues with her. She's very complicated for me, but for the time, Jane Austen's writing is very progressive. I liked the female lead, the intellectual female lead. It was really interesting to me to read. So yeah, I liked it a lot.
That's great. If it made you think you like reading, then what more can we really ask of any author? That's great. How about you, Yvonne?
Well, I don't have that much experience with Jane Austen because in Spain she's not really part of the school curriculum or anything like that. But I have read, probably about the same amount of time ago, Northanger Abbey, and just arrived to the UK, and now wanted to sort of get involved with literature.
So you were immersing yourself in English culture by reading Jane Austen. So that's
I read Northanger Abbey, and I enjoyed it, but I can't really remember what the plot was, to be honest. I just know that it's like a romance. Sort of novel for aimed at women, which is something that's still very much happening right now, and I think a lot of authors are taking inspiration from her. I've read Philippa Gregory, who is a similar sort of style, that's what I know of her.
It's interesting that, because I mean a lot of people have read perhaps one novel or two, but it's not often going to be Northanger Abbey. That is their one novel that they've read. So it's great that actually you've come into Austen that way, via a slightly different route, because it often would be Pride and Prejudice or Emma, which is another very popular one that has just been done on television again, on film version.
Quite recently.
So coming in through Northanger Abbey is actually an interesting way to get into it.
I don't know why. I just know I saw it and I thought,
this is how English people live.
This sounds good.
Well, the other great thing about Austen is that it's just 6 novels essentially, which is Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, Emma, and Persuasion. And so it's a sort of little set that there are other writings as well, but those 6 make a really good kind of package, I think, both for studying and for what I was saying about opening up Austen's presence in the 21st century. So I'm just going to read one of my favourite passages from Persuasion, which is the last novel that Jane Austen finished. And I don't know why, but it's just a line I particularly like. It's a description of these characters out for a walk in the country. That in itself is perhaps, it's not that often that we mainly associate Austen, I think, with urban scenes or indoor scenes. But in this thing, they go out for a walk in the country. They're going to a place called Winthrop, but on the way they kind of stop for a rest. And the main character, Anne, is feeling a little bit out of the group because they're all kind of pairing off, or they've got other things they're interested in. And because it's a particular time of the year, she starts to sort of feel quite melancholy about the year ending, and sort of gets into quite romantic, kind of poetic thoughts, and indulges in that a bit, and that sort of comforts her, which something you can relate to. But then they start walking again. Winthrop was their destination, and after another half-mile of gradual ascent through large enclosures, where the ploughs at work and the fresh-made path spoke the farmer counteracting the sweets of poetical despondence and meaning to have spring again, they gained the summit of the most considerable hill and soon commanded a full view of Winthrop. Now, the line I really like is there about the farmer counteracting the sweets of poetical despondence, meaning to have spring again. It's just somehow it's such a great line, because it sort of reminds you, no matter how perhaps you might feel melancholy, particularly at the end of the year, you might kind of feel down and despaired. There'll often be someone else not too far away who's got a more positive view. The farmer meaning to have spring again.
Yeah.
And actually, spring is something that you have to have faith is going to happen, and the farmer is like getting on with it. So there's that interesting contrast between Anne in this novel, who's having these kind of sort of literary moment, but there's also the more kind of down-to-earth approach that's not too far away, and it's something quite... You need both, I think, and it makes quite an interesting kind of...
There's such a real emotion
there
as well, like waiting for spring to come and the happy feeling you get when it starts to get a little bit lighter every day. I think it's so nice.
Yes, that's right, yes. And the word meaning to have spring again, the farmer is basically saying, I'm hoping it's going to be spring, I'm going to get on with what I've got to get on with. So it's just an interesting tension there. I don't think that line is often picked out, but it's the one that kind of... stuck with me when I was rereading Persuasion.
I think it's particularly topical right now, where we're waiting for the
we
spring.
We are waiting for spring. That's right.
It's currently snowing, so I'm waiting for the spring.
It is snowing. We can't see outside the studio, but it is snowing, but we're meaning to have spring again. And lots of things that we're doing to get ready for that, including this podcast series.
Yes.
Well, we mentioned another author earlier, which was Walt Whitman, and it's going to be quite a long way in the alphabet before we get to W for Walt Whitman, but we're going to go there instead with A for American literature. Mm-hmm. And I asked Eloise to tell us a little bit about an American literature course she's done and something that she remembers from that.
Yeah, so I did 19th century American literature when I was at UCC in Cork. So I looked at Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson.
I should just say that you did a year abroad as
I did.
part of your degree at Leeds Trinity.
I did a year abroad, and that was one of the modules that I picked because I'd never looked at American literature before, and I thought it's probably about time that I do, because Walt Whitman is like a classic, and I'd also, his book is in Breaking Bad, and I was just kind of interested in it. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it kind of ties in perfectly to the story of Breaking Bad a little bit. Yeah, Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman.
Is it true to say then that Breaking Bad has got a lot of literary allusions in it?
It does. Oh. It does, yeah. It kind of reflects Leaves of Grass, like the sort of contradictions of America and power structures and greed. But Song of Myself is probably his most famous poem. It's very long, so I'm only going to read the beginning part. And it's probably the part I like the most as well, so...
it's a poem, this?
It is. It's a poem, yeah. It's from 1892. It says, I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume, for every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I loaf and invite my soul, I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. My tongue, every atom of my blood, formed from this soil, this air, born here of parents born here from parents the same and their parents the same. I, now 37 years old, in perfect health begin, hoping to cease not till death. Creeds and schools in abeyance, retiring back a while sufficed at what they are, but never forgotten. I harbour for good or bad, I permit to speak at every hazard, nature without check with original energy.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for reading that. So I've got to say, I have not heard any of the poem read before. It's not something I've studied, and so it's great to know that it really kind of had an impact on you. Can you say what it was about it that you liked?
It's like how I said before about the word allness at the beginning, coming full circle. It's very sort of, he sees himself as one with nature and that we're all the same. America was so, it was like a growing nation at this point, 1892. Yeah. It was very new in ways of democracy, and so it's all about like equality, and we all come from nature and we all die and we're reborn into nature. We are all as one, so we're all equal. And I just think that's such a nice thing to hear. It's a very uplifting poem. I mentioned Emily Dickinson before. She came a little bit after Walt Whitman. She was very negative, and her poems were all about death and there's nothing after and questioning life and very existential. But he was very, it just feels like so uplifting.
Very spiritual.
Very spiritual, that's the word, and just the one with nature and not thinking about death as just the end, like we're all with each other all the time. Everything that happens is meant to happen. I think it's just beautiful, to be honest.
I liked the way it ended with the words, original energy?
Yeah.
Nature without check with original energy.
With original energy, so that's good, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there was something else kind of curious about the poem we saw when we were looking at it just before we started.
Yeah, it was the word loaf, Loafe.
Yeah, I loaf and invite my soul.
Yeah, which is to be at leisure, I guess.
Yeah, idle,
Yeah, to be
thinking.
idle. Yeah. And it's written with an E.
Yeah, it is.
We looked at it on the OED, didn't we?
Yes.
And it appears like he just added the E just because he wanted it. Because he wanted an E there.
Signature.
I was thinking about it when we were looking it up, and I was like, because he's an innovator in American literature, he wanted to completely separate himself from English literature. They were like, we're not the English anymore, we are American. So I was... Right. Maybe he just added the E to just be a bit different and quirky, and
it's just so interesting because that's sort of how you would expect to see a word that's really old to lose the E rather than to gain the E.
Yes, because when we're looking at Middle English, there's so many words that have that E, and you have to know that the E got lost.
Being one of them. Yes. I will always remember child with an E at the end.
Yes, indeed. And
maybe
so,
he did it because he sort of like sees America at its beginning.
Yeah.
So it's sort of using Old English. It's like their form of Old American. You know what I mean?
I was trying to give it that kind of sense of heritage.
Yeah, give it a heritage. In the writing.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that is a great line to end on, I think. Just give us the line again. The last line.
Nature without check with original energy.
Well, thank you both very much for bringing your original energy to our Give Me an A episode, and thanks very much. And we will be back with our next one, which will be all about things that begin with B. So till then, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You can find out more about English at Leeds Trinity from the Leeds Trinity University website, www.leedstrinity.ac.uk, and also from our @Leeds Trinity channel on YouTube, and from our Twitter account @LTU English. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Steve Oxon and FesleyanStudios.com for this music, which is called Rio After Dark.